Greetings, magical mavens. It's Afira here, a witch of hedge, hearth, and harvest. Don't worry, I'm not jumping into holiday season content this early. Although if that's something you like to do as soon as Halloween is over, no shade. But in this video, I invite you to join me for a little trip back in time to early this year when I first began my gardening and foraging journey after moving from a busy industrial area to a more rural town to bring my green witchy dreams to life. This film will take you on the enchanting journey of my first 6 months in this new environment, from the winter solstice through to the summer solstice. Join me as I start composting, planting my garden, sprouting seedlings indoors, and then transitioning outside to create a magical garden from scratch. You'll get to see the entire process of transitioning this previously neglected and kind of abused lawn into a magical place for food, herbs, and beautiful flowers to grow. You'll also get to join me for foraging adventures out in nature along the way, because my gardening journey is deeply entwined with my foraging journey, as one of my goals with my garden is to create a habitat that embraces plants that are native and naturalized to my part of the world. So without further ado, let's make some magic. One way I like to embrace the earth element, even in the dead of winter, is to tend to plants indoors. And this particular container is actually my oldest living example of that tradition. Quite a few years ago now, on a cold, snowy day, I found myself, just like every winter, longing for the smell of warm dirt. This was also at a time when I was living in a very unnatural environment, and I desperately felt the need to connect to something green and growing, even on the days when it was too cold or out of the way to commute to a local nature park, and even though I couldn't really keep houseplants alive in that dark, depressing apartment. I made up my mind that that summer I would find a way to bring a little bit of the outdoors in, and I started learning about moss terrariums. And so, when the time came, I gathered moss from a local waterfall and some from the surrounding woods and created a mini forest floor to keep right on the shelf of my headboard so I could see and smell a bit of nature every single day if I wanted to. And it's evolved a bit over the years as I've added a ficus plant that kept drying out in open air and done what you're seeing here, cleaning up the contents of the jar and updating this mini sacred space periodically. Good morning, magical mavens. It is the 2nd of March, and it is a very gray but bird chirpy morning, and I am getting started on my gardening. So this morning in my ugly homesteading journal, I took some notes on a book that I'm reading again this year, Bud, Blossom, and Leaf by Dorothy Morrison, and it is a witchy gardening book. It's by no means a be-all, end-all information on gardening or witchy gardening even, but it has some really fun little ideas in it that kind of get your brain going. So in the book, it recommends choosing themes for your garden beds, and I love that idea. And in the past, I couldn't really do that because I really only had just my one little container on my patio, and then I would just use little pots for individual things outside of that. But now I have a lot more space, and I'm really excited to plant maybe 3 garden beds. We'll see. I don't want to overdo it my first year, but I definitely liked her idea of doing a pollinator garden. I have been wanting and trying actually to grow milkweed for the monarch butterflies ever since my sister got really into rescuing them a couple of years ago. Didn't have any luck at the old place, so I'm going to try it again here. But along with that, I'm also just going to try some of these other things that were both listed in the book and then other things that I did research on. So the theme that I'm kind of doing, regardless of like which of these other themes I go with, is that I want pretty much everything that I plant, especially this first year, to have multiple uses. So for the pollinator garden, I want to grow, herbs, because any herbs that are allowed to flower are good for a pollinator garden, and I don't usually mind when my herbs flower. Some people say they taste more bitter, and they kind of do, but it doesn't really bother me. I always grow sunflowers. I've been wanting to grow calendula. I know that it's similar to marigold, which I always like growing. Catmint, which I finally looked it up. The difference between catnip and catmint is essentially that catmint is just a prettier, less invasive version of catnip. And apparently some cats are less attracted to it, but it depends on your cat. So probably just going to end up doing catnip because I do want it to be something that my cat enjoys as well, but we will see. Lavender, obviously. I had some lavender in the last ground level garden that I had at my family home that my mom had planted, and I've never gotten it to grow in a pot, so we're going to try it. Nasturtium I have never grown, but I keep hearing good things about it. Coneflowers I love, and we had them in the home that I lived in when I was a teenager, that I then lived in for a few years as an adult, and I miss them, and I've never gotten them to grow in a pot, so we're going to try that again. And yeah, we're going to try our milkweed again. I'm going to try and grow some berries this year because my partner really loves berries, and berries are some of the only fruit you can really grow if you don't have an orchard, so I thought that would be fun. Squashes and tomatoes, as always. Well, I say as always, I've never really successfully grown squashes in the apartment setting, but we're not there anymore. So yay, I can grow some squashes again. Yarrow, I have gotten yarrow into a small little plant 2 years in a row now, but I'm hoping to get bigger yarrow here. Violet, I actually harvested some violet from the root in a local park last year, and I still have it. It's real tiny right now, but I do have it, and I'm going to try and plant that outside. I've heard that bee balm, which is apparently the same thing as bergamot, is really good. I know I've used the essential oil before, and maybe as a tea, but I would love to actually grow that. I have encountered the plant at our local nature preserve last year, and it's beautiful. And yes, bees were all over it. Horehound I've heard is good. I don't know too much about it, but I've heard that that's good. Cornflower, is cornflower a weed? I think cornflower is a weed around here, so I may or may not even need to plant that. Something to keep in mind is that I'm going to live really close to where a bunch of beautiful weeds are probably going to be growing, so some of these things I might grow, others of them I might transplant from nature, others of them I might just experience in nature nearby. Red clovers, I'm really curious to see if we have red clovers in the yard. That would be awesome. If not, I'm probably going to plant some. I wrote down some things for a tea garden. and an herb garden for culinary purposes, a vegetable garden, obviously. And then I just took a note here that even though it wasn't mentioned in any of the lists that I was researching, I have always wanted to try the Three Sisters gardening method of the Native Americans. And by always wanted to, I mean for the past several years when I didn't have a yard. So that might be something fun to do. I also made a list of medicinals. So part of the idea here is that some of the things on each of these lists are going to be kind of in multiple lists, and I'm going to know that those are going to be good things to definitely prioritize growing because they will serve multiple different purposes in my garden. And then I'm also about to go through and circle things that I already have seeds for. And then with those two lists of the things I definitely want to grow and the things I already have seeds for, that'll get my seed started. And then I can go ahead and purchase anything that I know I definitely want to grow that I don't have right now. So folks, I think we're going to be saying goodbye to the seed grimoire. This was so cute and I loved this experiment. However, as you can see, it's really not very practical because the seeds are bulging out of it. And that didn't used to bother me too much until I moved in here. It's been a little bit of a culture shock. I wanted to live in a house and live closer to nature, and I knew that was going to come with challenges, but I just didn't know how many and how the rapid succession of what those challenges were going to be. So I've been on a learning curve. So one of the things that I dealt with when I first moved in was that I discovered that we had mice in the basement at the time, and this was in one of my containers in the basement, and they got into it and they ate a bunch of the seeds. So I just had to like deal with that. I put it into an enclosed container and started keeping it upstairs, but I also haven't been through it since that happened because there was so much of a mess to clean up down there that this wasn't a priority. So this is going to be my first time going through and seeing what the damage actually was. Hopefully there are still some good seeds in here. There probably are, but we're going to come up with a new seed storing system from this year onward. Let's see what is going on in here. So, this might not be too bad. I think what happened, what I took note of specifically was, this one right here. There was a huge gap in the book right there, and they specifically got into this thing of wildflowers. But yeah, it doesn't look like they really got into anything else, which is awesome. Yeah, okay, that's good. So yeah, I am going to take note of what's in here and get some seeds started. All right, so we have a lot of seeds. So this whole section right here is all the seeds that I already have, which is a lot of my basic vegetables that I eat and always want to be growing. Things that I have either successfully grown or attempted to grow in the past that I'm hoping will do better here. And then there's also a few things on this list, kind of like the yarrow, for example, that are things that I don't consider essentials necessarily, but they're things that I would like to expand into using more as I get more into my green witchy path. Some things that I've, again, successfully grown or bought the seeds and it didn't work last time, so we're gonna try it again. This is my shopping list for things that I want to try. And actually, other than a few things like sunflower, which I ran out of sunflower seeds last year, and cabbage and celery and hot peppers, most of the other things on here are just like interesting herbs and plants that I would like to have in my tea garden or my medicinal garden or whatever, that I don't necessarily have too much wrapped up in it. Some of these are things that I know where to forage at certain times of the year, or if I really wanted to use them, I could just buy them in dried form or whatever. But these are things that are kind of an optional shopping list for the most part, things that would be fun to try. So I'm already in really good shape for getting my garden started because I have most of the essentials ready to go. And now we get to do, funnily enough, this is one of my favorite parts now, is doing some coco coir. I don't know why, but the science class little kid in me just really enjoys watching these expand. So let's do it. If you didn't catch my epic fails last year, The reason why I use coco coir is because it is a sterile seed starting medium, and most young seedlings can't handle homemade compost, which is what I normally use in my garden for other gardening purposes. And I tried to use it to start seeds last year, and almost everything died and got moldy because there was just too much biological matter in there. And this is sterile, so it keeps them clean while they're living off of their own like seed nutrients. And then once they're large enough to actually start needing nutrients, then I can start putting some of my natural fertilizer into it, which honestly is usually watered down menstrual blood or the water that I use to rinse off other vegetables or to cook other vegetables, as long as there's no salt in it. So here we go. Wasn't that fun? And now, let the planting begin. Let's make some tea. So, one of the things I'm so excited about for gardening is growing some new mint. Me and mint have quite a relationship. It's one of my favorite herbs. I talked a lot about it in my herb lore video last year. And I keep some mint that I harvested in this cute little container that I made. And I love in my practice having stored herbs on hand that I harvested myself, as you know. And mint is one of those things that was one of the very first herbs that I ever harvested myself when I was a kid. We grew a lot of mint, somewhat unintentionally, at my family home growing up. And when I lived in that house for a while as an adult, after my parents had moved out, I harvested a ton of the mint from there before having to move away. And I kept it in a container and continued using it for just for tea as well as for magical purposes, almost to manifest a better home and garden after that, because the mint was something that really connected me to the land. And mint just doesn't care. It will grow almost anywhere. And not so well in pots, unfortunately, on a patio that I've noticed. This batch of mint is actually not from my old house. That was like going on 10 years ago now. Not quite, but in that range. So I've gone through that. It took me a few years. This is actually from a friend's house a couple of years ago. I'm ready to actually just finish using this up because it is pretty old. And I'm excited to actually grow and harvest my own for the first time in a really long time. So let this be a little magic spell for the abundance of mint that I'm gonna have in my garden. Well, this was such a cute idea, but first of all, I started with a very cheap thrifted picture book, so the plastic really sucks, so that was a constant problem trying to get them in and out. And then it also bulged, which also probably led to it becoming attractive to pests. So I don't know what I'm going to do with this now. I might just actually gut the whole inside of it and just turn it into a different type of journal. Maybe even a garden journal that I can just write stuff down, but I'm gonna go ahead and transfer these things into a box. This was the box that I used to use before I had that bright idea, and I really like it because the seed packets fit really, well, do they? I thought my seed packets fit really neatly in there. Maybe it's better for these. These are for seeds that I have collected myself, either from my own plants that have gone to seed or from grocery store plants and things like that. But yeah, these ones will fit in here. We've already got acorn squashes going everywhere. So yeah, let me see how my new organization system is going to go for now. Okay, so I guess this works. My homemade seed packets fit perfectly in here. And then once these ones have been opened and folded back and pinned shut, they too fit perfectly in there. So I think what I'm gonna do is just leave these half-used ones in here, which also typically indicate older seed packets. Something that I did learn over many years is that seeds don't always last forever. You're really supposed to plant most of them within the first couple of years. They do kind of have an expiration date and they just get a little bit less vital over the years. I also think a couple of years ago, one of the reasons I didn't have any success is because not only did I have some very old seeds, but I think I also had this sitting on the back of my stove at my old apartment, and I think that they actually cooked. So that's another thing, keeping them in cool, dry conditions, preferably dark conditions, I think, so that they don't like sprout or anything, is ideal. And I think recently I learned that freeze drying will make seeds last for like many, 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 many years. I do not own a freeze dryer yet. But I am going to learn some better ways to store these because I know that I've been just kind of flying by the seat of my pants with seed storage, and I want to do that a little bit more accurately. So this will be a safe container for the ones that are open. And then these I'm probably going to stick into another container that I have upstairs. So since I am getting to this task at a waning moon instead of a new moon or a waxing moon, I am going to use a tip that I learned from lunar gardening to plant things that grow underground during the waning moon. So we'll see how this goes. Currently I only have 3 of these. On my shopping list I do have other root vegetables like turnips and parsnips that I recently tried and I want to grow. But this is what I have so far. I also have a seed potato over here, and I don't think that I'm gonna start growing this yet or even cutting it up, because I feel like once you cut it up, then it has more of an opportunity to mold and like need to just be put out in the ground. And something I learned last year with chitted potatoes is that the second that you plant them, they start growing really fast. And it is still the first week of March here, so I don't think that I'm gonna be planting this out anytime soon. So I'm just gonna let it sit here and we're gonna let that do its thing. So just as I was handling that, one of the little things came off, and I'm wondering what would happen if I planted this. I might plant this sheerly out of curiosity. And using the little tough lessons that I've learned the past couple of years now, I'm gonna try storing this in this safe spot on the back of the fridge as opposed to in the basement or on top of the oven. I don't know why I thought that was a good idea. So I think this is going to be my little setup for these first few plants this week. And then in 2 weeks, or I don't know, a week from now, I don't even know when the new moon is, I'm going to do some more. But yeah, this is another way that I like to recycle. Unfortunately, our society is still making a lot of disposable plastic, and every once in a while I end up with more than I care to have. And I typically try to just recycle as much as I can, even though I know that's far from a perfect system. So when there are times when there's something that I can reuse in some way, I definitely try to do that. So I normally don't buy these coffee K-cup things In fact, I didn't buy any for many years. I only used my reusable one. But this past fall, there was this really nice looking sampler set of fall flavored coffees that I really wanted to try. So I told myself I would just get them and save these for starting seeds. And they actually work really well for starting seeds because they have this sort of mesh on the inside. So it keeps your soil in. But if you poke a drainage hole, which if you've put it in your Keurig coffee maker, it should already have a hole in it, right? Then it gets its drainage. And if there's a little bit of coffee in there, I think that's okay because coffee is fertilizer. You don't want to plant your seeds directly into a thing of coffee because that would be too acidic for most plants and probably for all baby seedlings. My sister took me to get a nice piece of cake for my birthday last month, and I thought this would be the perfect thing to kind of create a little mini greenhouse for this. And I think I'm gonna actually try doing these just on a windowsill this year. I think I'm gonna start by doing the top of the refrigerator because it's warm up there. And then as soon as they emerge, I think I'm gonna actually just put them on a really sunny windowsill instead of the grow lamp and see how that goes. I'm probably gonna pull the grow lamp out on the new moon when I have like a lot more seedlings to do and not as much windowsill space, but I'm curious to see what will happen in a sunnier house without using the grow lamp for everything. So I already planted my beets in the little coffee cups, and then I used like one of these cookie type trays to plant some radishes just now. And I covered that just with a plastic bag. And just since we're talking about eco-friendly, when I say plastic bag, I mean like I have literally a bag under my sink where I stashed a bunch of the bags that clothing came in when I purchased a bunch of new clothes a few years ago. And I use that for both garbage bags in my small garbage can and for anything else that I need plastic for because I hate the plastic industry and I really do not like to buy garbage bags and promote that. But sometimes you just need some plastic, so use what you have. That said, I'm not going to do that same method with the carrots because since carrots get long, they don't like to like hit bottom on something, and I don't want to risk these hitting bottom on a plastic container. Most people plant these directly outside, but I think I want to plant them inside first. So I'm going to plant them in this egg thing. I am hoping that this year, since I'm planting only in this sterile coco coir, that I won't have issues with this molding. Last year when I used compost, this molded really bad, so wish me luck. Good morning, magical mavens. We've already got some seeds coming and it's only been a couple of days. While the moon is still waning, I think it would be safe to go ahead and pot up some of these plants that have roots on them. So let's do that. All right, what do we have here? Our radish experiment is working, so I'm gonna pot this up and see if this gives me some radish greens. This is a philodendron that I bought at least 2 years ago when I was still trying to have a lot of houseplants at my old apartment, and it was not happy there. So I gave it to my sister and she just kept it in a water propagation setup similar to this for about a year, and it actually started to grow back. It was looking amazing. It wasn't even in a window at her house where she used to live, which was a house just like this one, but with actual south-facing windows. And it was doing great. At the same time that I moved in here, she moved into an apartment that doesn't have good light. So it was doing really bad, and she passed it back to me to bring back to life. So we're gonna give this guy like his 9th life now, but wish him luck. This grocery store rosemary is hit or miss. Me and rosemary have a difficult relationship, but so like this one has a root, but it also doesn't look very good. This one did not grow a root. This one did not grow a root. This one did not grow a root, but it looks healthy. It's kind of confusing, rosemary. They say that rosemary likes it dry, but every time I've ever had a plant and tried to keep it dry, it wasn't happy. The only time I've even remotely kept it alive was when it was in water, like a water propagation. Usually once I plant them up, they die. I don't know, guys. I'm hoping that now that I have more light, this is going to be better because I love rosemary and I really want us to be friends. I am gonna give this fresh water in here, and I am gonna go ahead and pot up this one. I'm just curious to see if it does better in coco coir than in water, and we'll see if any of the rest of these end up surviving. So this is just the hydrated coco coir that I hydrated just as much as I needed to in order to get it hydrated. How many times can I say hydrated in a sentence? I am not going to add any additional water to this because I guess rosemary likes it well draining and dry. This is nice and moist, but it's not soggy at all. So I hope this works. This is a succulent that I actually trimmed the floret off of, and it's doing well in its own pot. These were just some gangly bits, and I thought I would stick it in water because when my aloe plant was struggling last year or the year before in its pot, I totally dug it up and just put its roots in water for a few weeks, and it like immediately got really thick and juicy and nice. And then I repotted it in soil and it's been doing great ever since. So I figured that since they're both succulents, maybe this one would like that too. But it has been in water for weeks now and it hasn't rooted at all. So I am just gonna try sticking it in some coco coir here. I'm also gonna go up against the rules here and use a container that doesn't have a drainage hole in it. This is just an espresso cup that I got when I was in France when I was a teenager. And I think that oddly enough, one of my issues with these tiny succulents is that sometimes I do forget about them and they do actually dry out. So I'm just gonna stick this in here. And I don't even know if I'm sure which way is the top and which way is the bottom. I thought this was the top and that was the bottom, but seeing as it didn't root, I'm like, was I right about that? So I'm just gonna stick it with both ends into the coco coir and we will see what happens. And here are just some grocery store cuttings. Aside from this, this is a cutting from one of my terrarium plants. So we'll see what that does. But let's pot these guys up. See, these rosemaries did pretty good. So I don't know if it was the container. Maybe it likes this one better for some reason. Maybe there's better humidity in this one. I have no idea. So this thyme plant is doing something really interesting. It's put roots down and the root is now growing up. And is it turning into a stem? I almost want to leave this here and see what happens. But I also kind of want to pot this up. This garlic is giving me life right now. I just stuck this on my windowsill. It was absolutely not showing any signs that it could or would root. I know some of our groceries are treated with anti-rooting, but look at that. Now I wish I had done a bunch more. I'm going to do a bunch more. And our radish is doing great. Haha. because the sun is setting beautifully in a completely different spot than it did at the winter solstice, I'm noticing, much later in the evening, I noticed a crane flying by my window. Now, I get to do a lot of bird watching and listening in my new home, a lot more than I did when I was in a more densely populated area, but this is the first time that I have seen a crane fly by my window. Normally the biggest bird that I've seen outside of my window is just a hawk that tends to hang out in the thistle fields. But if I'm going to see cranes, I normally have to go to a park or something for that. So instead of just being like, wow, a crane, and then going on with my busy work, I decided to pause and actually look up the spiritual meaning of cranes. And unlike a lot of the time when I do a quick Google search on the meaning of something, this time the very first meaning that popped up totally resonated. And I'm just going to read it to you. It's cranes hold deep spiritual meaning in various cultures and religions, symbolizing longevity, peace, wisdom, good fortune, creativity, loyalty, and dignity. In the Native American culture, cranes represent wisdom, balance with nature, and are considered messengers of peace. And I think all of that really resonated just on an energetic level, but linguistically, the words that are really popping out at me are the part about wisdom and balance with nature, as well as the sort of fortune part of it, of being a messenger of peace. And something that I've really been digging into and having a lot of heartfelt intentions around, especially since I've moved, is just harmony with nature. When I moved, I wanted to live closer to nature, and now I do, and there is a lot of culture shock that's going on with that, and I am here for it, and I want to really be in harmony with nature this year, especially as spring is getting underway. And I feel like this crane was kind of telling me that like that tipping point is happening now as the early spring is starting to move towards late spring. It's feeling like that Beltane energy, while it isn't here yet, it's almost like I feel like the universe is telling me it's going to be a very good Beltane season. So anyway, I just wanted to pass along that little bit of magic. Observing wildlife and doing wildlife divination is a great thing to do this time of year. It is so second nature to me this time of year to start watching for wildlife and sort of feeling into the energy that they bring to me, and occasionally feeling inspired to actually look up the meaning and see if there's a deeper message for me. That is something that I've done a lot in my life, and I did want to kind of give that honorable mention here. If that's something that you would like a whole video on, please leave me a comment and let me know. left the busy industrial area that I used to live in and moved closer to nature, I honestly wasn't expecting to discover that there was just as much trash and litter going on out here as there was in the old apartment complex. Some parts of the yards were absolutely filthy, some of which were littered with random garbage that must have come from the road nearby, and others of which were riddled with plastic toy parts and candy wrappers left behind by the previous tenants. So one of the first things I did to connect with the land and establish a new paradigm here was to clean up all the rubbish that had been carelessly thrown around. And I also went the extra mile and even picked up trash from the other side of the fence between my yard and the road, knowing that it might be an ongoing task to keep the surrounding area clean, but that I would at least do my part to give this entire space a fresh start. If I wanted this land to be fruitful and inviting for me, I knew that had to start with making an offering to the land. And what better way than to get rid of all of this junk that humans had used and abused and give this land the respect that it deserved. looking at you through the glass. Greetings, magical mavens. I woke up this morning and I realized that it is the new moon in Taurus. I have seeds to start, I have gardening to do, and I was thinking about how cyclical living with not just the moon, but also the lunar astrology has been really helping me in my witchy homemaking journey. So I just happened to stop into the dollar store yesterday and I was intending to buy some of these wildflower mixes that they have because I do have a couple more little flowery areas to plant up outside. But while I was there, me and my sister also ended up finding these root bulbs of various flowers that we thought would be fun to try. And of course, I also stocked up on just some of my regular stuff. I'm obsessed with turnips. I was excited to find them at the dollar store this year, and I figured I would grab the last two that they happen to have. And I also grabbed some sage. Now, sage is really hard in my experience to start from seed, but I'd be trying. I'd be trying. And I also found just some other flowers that I thought would be fun. But I also have just some regular gardening to do as well. I have been not as far along as I would have hoped with the actual food crop gardening. I've gotten a little bit overwhelmed and some of my seedlings didn't make it because I accidentally fried them in the greenhouse, because in my mind from last year, I'm like, yeah, when the weather starts to warm up, you put the greenhouse out and you use that to harden off your seedlings, right? Wrong. Not when you have an actual outdoor south-facing garden. So I do need to restart some things, and I have a feeling that they are going to germinate and grow a little bit faster because the weather has actually changed and everything. Some things I might start directly outside, others I will do indoors, and maybe even some of the like summer warm weather type things I will do in the greenhouse because I think those types of things are doing well in there. Anyway, the point is that I've been waiting for today to do this because I've been experimenting with the whole concept of lunar gardening, which, if you haven't heard of it, lunar gardening is something that even the muggles are onto. If you go to like almanac.com, you can learn about how the moon cycle affects gardening. And I've never been super strict with that because sometimes, as you know, I think it's more important to just experiment and try things than to try to be perfect and wait for the perfect time to get things done. So, for example, if there was a type of seed that I really needed to get started, but it wasn't the right moon phase, and I knew that the growing season wasn't going to be long enough if I continued waiting, I would just start that seed and hope for the best. It's not an obligation, but I am so curious to see if it does make a difference because so many people in the witchy and the muggle community seem to think that it really does make a difference. So what I have heard is that if you're starting things that the main part of it that you're going to be harvesting is underground, you can start that during the waning moon. Or even like the full moon, I guess. And then if it's something that you're going to be harvesting the part that's above ground primarily, you want to start those things during a new or waxing moon. So I could have started my potatoes over the weekend or earlier last week if I had the time, energy, and guts to do it. I honestly am a little bit scared about planting potatoes because I know there are burrowing rodents and things and bugs in this yard, and I don't know how well that's going to go. So that is something I am going to be doing possibly during this waxing moon if I feel like I need that to get done. But if I'm busy and I don't get to it until the waning moon, that's probably even better for those. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that not only is it the new moon that I've kind of been waiting for just to get a few things started up because I was like, you know what, I'm busy, and by the time I get around to it, I might as well wait until the new moon, right? But I also wanted to talk about the fact that it is the Taurus new moon. So, as we know in astrology, during Taurus season, when the sun is in Taurus, which is this late spring season, there is always a new moon in the same sign that the sun is in. So, there's always a new moon in Taurus around Beltane season, essentially. And Taurus, I'm not going to go all into it because we just did a video about this on the other channel. I will link that right here. But Taurus is essentially that grounded earth element, that energy of abundance and growth and fertility. So it is actually the perfect new moon to be starting seeds. So I'm really excited about that. So something I'm kind of musing about right now is, because you know me, well, maybe you don't because this is a new channel, but I feel like most people watching this are coming over from my other channel. If not, welcome. Welcome to the insanity. I am really into magical thinking and cycles and all of that kind of seasonal energy and stuff, but at the same time, the only thing that really keeps me sticking to it is when I see it working. I am one of those people that kind of needs practicality and 3D evidence, which are also things that are kind of ruled over by Taurus. So what I'm musing about right now is it that the supposed astrological lunar dates that are supposed to be good for X, Y, and Z, is it that the energy is just so magical and so potent that day that any seeds or spells you start on those days are going to be imbued with that energy? And or is it also just that nature is ready for it? By the time it is the new moon in Taurus every year, nature is ready for planting seeds outside. Obviously, there are some things that it's very helpful if you live in a short growing season to get started on windowsills or under grow lamps indoors earlier, maybe on the new moon in Gemini or the new moon in Aries even. But is the reason why the new moon in Taurus considered so perfect for gardening and starting seeds, because that is the natural time for many of us when just throwing a seed on the ground would actually be fruitful, because the energy that's coming is going to be supportive of that. I don't know. I think maybe it's a little bit of both. I like to believe it is. Like for me, in my environment, the new moon in Aries season back in March, it is a great time to start seeds indoors, which requires a lot of like ambition and sort of motivation and like almost alchemy to make it work, right? You have to kind of play around with the elements in a sort of unnatural way to start seeds that early here. And it's necessary and it's useful, but that's Aries energy. Taurus energy is more that energy of like the earth is just already so abundant that whatever I plant today is bound to be fruitful or very likely to be fruitful, because that supportive, nurturing, and fertile energy is just already there. It's less about kind of trying to force it to work and more just allowing yourself to receive and allowing the energy to do what it does. And that's more of the Taurus. And then I guess I would say Gemini new moon, which was last month, is more kind of about experimentation. That's often a time where there's kind of just a lot going on in general as spring is getting really started. And there's a good chance that any seed starting that I do around that time is more so going to be like, ooh, this would be fun to do. That would be a fun experiment. Or, oh, let me just throw some of these into the greenhouse or the seed starting station because I'd love to have some fun flowers. Who knows whether or not this will work? Like, that was when I was actually planting like experimental flowers, flowers that I know are a little bit harder to grow, things that I had cold stratifying for a while, things that I know may or may not work out. And if they don't, it's not that big of a deal because it's just a playful experiment. That's more the Gemini energy for me. Also, those types of flowers are the ones that I feel like tend to be ruled by Gemini. Or by air in general. Aries season is more about planning and desiring and pursuing, where it's like I'm imagining the garden that I want. I'm getting ideas on Pinterest. I'm looking stuff up on YouTube about how to do things. I'm doing that sort of seed starting alchemy indoors using technology and stuff like that because I'm being ambitious about it, but it's not as much about being in the present moment in my experience. It's more about projecting into the future and like taking action to make stuff happen. Whereas Taurus season now is more so about that just grounded sense of receiving, where it's kind of just like, let me focus on the present moment. This to me is more about just enjoying the moment of planting these seeds and helping out these seedlings in their next stage of life and kind of just enjoying it, being in the weather even and experiencing the season. Whereas like Aries to me is way less about the present moment. It's not that it isn't about the present moment at all, because I always try to be mindful and in the present moment, but it's just a different energy. You know what I mean? It's just different. Like right now, I'm sitting here just enjoying the sunlight from my window, looking at all the beautiful colors of what these flowers might be someday, and just kind of like sipping my coffee and being very Taurus and like wanting to just kind of chat with you guys about it. Whereas like in Aries season, I was not sitting here chatting with you. Like I was getting the shit done, you know, like it needed to get done. That being said, I do need to channel a little bit of that Aries energy right now because I do need to really get moving here. So let me get that fire under my ass. So we are getting the cat door situation figured out, and this has taken a lot of thinking, a lot of thinking and chatting with me and my partner trying to figure this out. We managed to take the screen out of this and then put the cat door underneath this glass slidey thing, but he still has to get down the stairs. So we ordered this cat step ladder thingy. It fits awkwardly on the step, so I'm gonna try and use a cinder block to hold that in place, but it should work. And it does have like fabric stick-on thingies that seem to stick on really well, so that'll work with his claws. Since he is three-legged, he does rely heavily on his claws. So we're most of the way there. I could not get him to climb up on this thing to get up to that. I'm gonna see if I can continue getting him to work on it. And if that doesn't work, my other resort that I would rather not do is bring this chair over there, because he's very comfortable with using this grip and like climbing up on here. So we will get him out there. I just wanted to pop in here and just tell you the case in point of why this all needs to be set up properly. Just in the short time that I was looking at this, a bee tried to come in there, and then I went downstairs to get this mesh stuff. I was like, oh my gosh, that's right, we have this mesh that we were going to use for something else. It would be perfect to hot glue it on there to make a screen. And I brought the screen stuff up here, and I was all over there like moving it around and seeing how it would look, getting ideas. And then I looked down and I realized there was a freaking massive spider on it. Like not a gangly daddy long leg, but like a muscular spider. And instead of freaking out, because I'm getting better at not freaking out since I now live in a very buggy place, but I held it up to there and I plucked it and it went flying out. I tried to get a video, but it had already run away by the time I got my camera. So learning to work with nature here, but I will keep you guys posted on Mowgli's ability to get in and out with this crazy contraption we're coming up with. Buddy. Good job. She did it. Come on, buddy. Right here. Right here. Right here, Mo. So, my sister rents a workspace for her woodworking business, and behind the building is a massive pile of rubble from when it was built. And it's become a hidden gem for discovering and harvesting native and naturalized plant species. She first let me know about it when she noticed these enchanting purple flowers emerge, which I let her know are a species in the mustard and broccoli family called rockets. She was excited to pick some to preserve and use in her artwork, and I was excited to forage some to use in cooking, as well as transplant some to grow in my own garden, along with some other wild edibles and ornamentals. halfway through turning the compost over, I noticed what looked like giant pink grubs scattered around the heap, and looking more closely, my heart sank. These grubs had little paws like mammals, and I realized I had unearthed a nest of baby moles. I went through the whole compost pile to gather them all and move them to a safe spot where hopefully their mother could return for them. Thankfully, I was able to find them all alive and place them under a cardboard box for shelter from the hot sun. Then, all I could do was wait and hope for the best. After quickly finishing the compost, I moved to a different part of the garden to give the mother a chance to get her courage up and move them to a better hiding place. Stay tuned to see what happens. After a morning of hard work in the hot sun, I got a notification that something exciting had arrived in the mail. And I decided what better way to take a break from the manual labor and take my mind off of worrying about the baby moles while giving the mother some space to figure it out than to leaf through the summer 2024 issue of Starlight magazine. If you haven't heard, Starlight is a seasonal publication put out by my friend and colleague Tanae Stewart, aka the Witch of Lupin Hollow. And I've been a regular contributor since winter 2021. Many of my subscribers on the Writing Witch channel have seen the lovely spreads of previous issues in my videos, and some of you guys have even purchased your own copies or subscriptions through my affiliate link, and for that I want to say thank you so much. The magazine is something I'm super passionate about, and for this issue I wrote about how the season of summer is an invitation from Mother Earth to connect more closely with the magic of nature through learning to forage for wild plants. And for the first time ever, I actually invite you to join me for a reading of my article from this issue in the video that you see linked on your screen right now, which will also be linked down below. Now, normally I would not share an entire magazine article in a YouTube video, because obviously myself and the Lupin Hollow team want to invite you to cozy up with this inspiring content in the form of the beautiful print editions or digital PDF copies that we work so hard on and offer on the Lupin Hollow website. And yes, I still encourage you to do so, as back issues are available in digital form if you'd like to read the rest of this magazine or any of the others. But that being said, this is a special case. This year has been super busy for the small but hardworking team behind the scenes at Lupin Hollow, and unfortunately that resulted in a few major formatting errors in the summer issue specifically. Mainly that a paragraph was accidentally left out of my article, which to me was kind of a bummer because I thought it was a really important point that kind of tied the whole article together. So when I got my print copy and noticed this, it inspired me to offer to volunteer my time to look over each new issue before it comes out to make sure that things like spelling, punctuation, and formatting are all in order. Because as you probably know, if you've had any experience with writing or producing content, it can be really hard to spot one's own errors, especially when you're busy and working for a deadline. In fact, funnily enough, the first one that I did actually proofread was the fall one that came out recently, and when I got my print copy, I noticed that the entire magazine was absolutely flawless, except for a few very minor and not earth-shattering errors in my own article, because of course you just can't proofread yourself. Apparently it's impossible. And while there are no other super game-changing errors in the summer magazine, and I actually got a lot of really nice messages from folks saying that they got a lot of inspiration out of my article, I did still want to just take this opportunity to tell the whole story the way it was intended to be read, as I think you'll get just a little bit more value out of it. Again, the magazine is still beautiful, inspiring, and totally worth reading over and over again each year, just like every issue of Starlight. So if this flip through and sneak excerpt inspire you, I would love to invite you to purchase a digital back issue, or better yet, sign up for a subscription so you never miss a print edition before they sell out each season, which they always do very quickly. For back issues, print editions, or subscriptions purchased through the link in this video, a percentage of your order will go directly to me, which not only supports me to continue writing for the magazine, but now also helps to compensate me for the time that I volunteer for free to proofread them going forward. Also, the other big error in the summer edition was that the interactive grimoire page I designed was accidentally left out when they were editing it, so it was emailed as a printable to those who purchased back in June. If you're inspired to purchase a back issue, please email a copy of your receipt to me at the email address in the video description, and I'll be sure to forward the grimoire page to you as well. And finally, there is actually one statement I need to partially retract from my article after gathering more information, and I'll be addressing that in the video that's linked on the screen and down below as well. So after you're finished watching this vlog, I invite you to check out that link and join me for a cozy reading of my article about debunking myths about green witchery and what I learned in my first full year of wild crafting and foraging. Magical Mavens, I just wanted to pop in with a quick, interesting little update. All of the skills that I started developing in the old department are now paying off now as I'm learning additional skills. And one thing that's like very real for me right now is the concept of growing in pots. It seems counterproductive and counterintuitive that I am planting some of my crops in the same old pot from the old garden. But something that I have realized here is that there are slugs in this yard and they are absolutely ruthless. For some reason, some of the things that I planted earlier in the season are doing very well. I don't know if it's because they got big and tough and the slugs can't really get a handle on them. But all of my brassicas, except for the radishes, which are doing great, most of my brassica type things are not doing well. Peas and beans are not doing well. In fact, some of them seem to have completely disappeared. So I have tried to do some different techniques to keep the slugs at bay, but I'm not sure if it's working or if it's going to work. And my choice at this point is to either accept that I'm not going to have certain crops and that others are going to do better, which is probably to some extent going to be the case. This is all just an experiment after all. But I still want to give certain things a shot this year and see if it's still possible. So here I am planting peas in a pot because things in pots seem to be a lot less prone to slugs getting into them. So they're probably still going to do way better like out in the open than they would have under the awning at my old place, but just the fact that they're not directly in the ground in a really sluggy area is probably going to give them the head start they need. Who knows, maybe I'll end up like transplanting this, like plunking this out and sticking it in the dirt at some point, or maybe it'll turn out that since these are actually spring vegetables, which at this point it's pretty late to be getting these out because I had to start over and over again, maybe it'll be better that these are in a pot because I'll be able to move them to more of a shady or cooler location at some point if that becomes necessary. So we're gonna see what happens with that. So I'm getting some peas in here. I'm gonna try and do a container of beans if Mowgli will let me, and I am also going to restart a bunch of my brassicas. My plan with them is not necessarily to grow them in containers. I might end up doing some in a big tote, but my plan right now is just to get them very well established in plug trays or containers before planting them out and see if they get a better shot at life that way. So wish me luck. But yeah, circling back around to the point, the fact that I spent years, a couple of years, learning to grow in pots, learning sort of the slightly different needs that container vegetables need and kind of which things can be super crowded together like this, like peas, for example, versus which things need a lot more space, like squashes, cucumbers, tomatoes, etc. And just kind of learning the ins and outs of that. Even though it seems counterintuitive that I'm using those skills now for a different reason, here we are. So it seems a bit of a waste to be growing in containers when I have so much land, but it might just be one of those things where some things are better suited for pots and other things are going to take up the garden space. All right, guys, so since there are slugs and I don't feel like spending money and or wasting real beer, we are going to make beer. And when I say beer, I think what I really mean is ale, because we don't have hops. Let's see how this goes. So at this point in the video, I just wanted to make some statements about animals. I love animals, and I also recognize that sometimes tough decisions have to be made involving them. Firstly, I wanted to address the indoor-outdoor situation regarding Mowgli. I know this can be a sensitive subject for some cat people, especially since you saw earlier in the video that there were some potential predators in my area, and Mo is an elderly cat with 3 legs. I'm not going to go into immense detail on it here since I did make an entire video on this subject on my other channel, but my stance when it comes to cats is that I would rather make calculated risks to allow them to experience life as the semi-wild animals that they are than keep them cooped up. I'm really not someone who feeds into the energy of regret, instead choosing to believe that things happen as they're meant to and or as opportunities for growth. But if I did have regrets, one of my biggest ones would be that my girls, Neko and Trinity, didn't get to live out their final days in an indoor-outdoor setting. They were indoor-outdoor for most of their nearly 2 decades of life, and it made me sad that they were stuck in a second-story apartment where pets were not allowed loose on the grounds for the final years of their lives. While it was a non-negotiable for me that they at least had a patio to experience fresh air and sunlight, I wish they had died with grass between their little toe beans. One of my biggest motivations for manifesting a more natural place to live was to give Mo the opportunity to experience nature again in his twilight years. And while I've definitely taken precautions to set boundaries to keep him as safe as possible, at the end of the day, I would rather my cat meet their end doing what they love than live a long, boring, and depressing life on a windowsill. I'm sorry, I know that's gonna ruffle some feathers, and I totally understand because I love cats so much, but cats got a cat, if you know what I mean. And I do recognize that if a cat has spent their entire life indoors and they don't want to be outside, they absolutely should never be forced to go outside. It depends on the cat. But my cats really like the outdoors, and I like them to like the outdoors because I like the outdoors. It was definitely a bit scary to let Mo out in an unfamiliar environment, but we seem to have an agreement between the two of us that I set boundaries to keep him safe, and he, for the most part, agrees and adheres to them. At first, he was only allowed out in daylight when I was watching him, and honestly, he was kind of nervous too, so I almost had to cajole him out. But once he had gotten used to the concept, we slowly graduated him to being allowed out in daylight with me keeping an eye out even if I wasn't out with him the entire time. By midsummer, he understood where our territory is and that he's meant to stay in the yard. And by now, the point when I'm recording the dialogue for this, when it's late fall, he's even occasionally allowed out after dark, seeing as dark starts so early now, with the understanding that he has to stay nearby and he has to get his butt inside when I call him. Being that he's a cat, he's gotta push the boundaries, so sometimes he does insist on exploring the other side of the fence, but when I call him back, he returns right away and has never gotten near the road. Overall, we've learned to trust each other. He understands that it's my job to keep him safe, and I understand that he has to be able to make his own choices as the sovereign being that he is. I'd also like to mention that the local authorities did actually trap and remove the coyotes that were on the loose back in early spring, which is a bittersweet thing in and of itself. But in any case, Mo has enjoyed the entire season as an indoor-outdoor cat again for the first time since 9 years ago, and he's safe and sound. And we're both very happy with the way things have turned out. Now, when it comes to the animals we consider quote-unquote pests, this subject is also tough, because if it were up to me, we would all just get along. But honestly, the rodents in this area have been ruthless on my crops, and I've had to learn a lot about keeping them at bay. Unlike my girls, who rid the neighborhood I moved to as a teen of what had apparently been an awful mouse problem, Mo spent the first several years of his life in my sister's New York City apartment and never really learned to hunt out in nature. So while he stalks things and scares things away, as you've seen in this video, he doesn't actually catch things besides insects that get into the house, which is a huge help here actually. As you saw with the moles earlier, I'm reluctant to harm the local critters until and unless it's really warranted, which for me is when they try to infest the house or are decimating my garden, which is a source of food for me. And in fact, my mind was so boggled the whole time with how worried I was about those baby moles, because I was like, are these literally going to become pests that I'm going to not be able to stand later, but since they're babies now, I feel so strongly that I have to protect them. Thankfully, as it turns out, the moles pretty much just eat bugs and don't really compete for the vegetation, which is great, but the mice are another story. When I realized that they were eating all of my crops, I started by trying to use harmless methods like sprinkling hot pepper on things and trying this natural product that's supposed to deter them. Unfortunately, neither of these things really worked, and actually right before getting the camera out, I literally watched a mouse laughing at me while eating a stolen piece of my radish plant in this mouse hole that they had formed in my garden bed. After that point, I did have to rethink my entire garden setup to get rid of my cute little medieval natural border that I had made, which was serving as a hiding spot for mice, and I built an ugly man-made fence to keep out larger animals like deer and rabbits. And while I really didn't want to, I did finally resort to setting mouse traps in areas where crops were continuously being targeted by them. My way of giving back to nature was to leave their bodies on the compost pile for insects and scavengers to consume. And while I know there are going to be some viewers who dislike my video or unsubscribe because of this, I've opted to be open and honest about where I'm at with this, because as witches, we have to understand that there is a dark and a light side to everything. Our ancestors only survived because they did what was necessary to survive, which included competing with animals to protect their food sources from being taken or contaminated by vermin. Now, all of that being said, I'm taking what I've learned this year and making choices that will hopefully protect myself and the wildlife next year. Namely, I'll be switching a lot of my crops to raised garden beds so that it'll be harder for animals to get into them and I won't have to guard my crops as fiercely. So for those of you who haven't canceled me for sharing this, what are your thoughts on this subject? Is this something that you've had to deal with? Do you have any tips? I've noticed that this is something that most homesteading channels barely talk about. I don't know if it's because they're lucky to live in vermin-free areas, or if their pets are just expert hunters, or if it's because they're avoiding talking about it because they don't want people to get mad at them. But this is something that I've really had to process and do a lot of shadow work around. So let me know what you think. Alright, magical mavens, if you're still watching at this point in this epically long video, I want to say thank you so much for joining me for this adventure. Stay tuned for the next segment where I share my harvest season with you, where you get to see the fruits of my labor in the garden, as well as the epic abundance gifted to me by the universe in the form of some foraged blessings from the woods nearby. And if you made it this far in the video, please comment letting me know what you enjoyed most about it, and I can create more content on that going forward. And as promised, here's that video sharing my article about magical foraging from the summer 2024 edition of Starlight magazine. See you there!